My name is Harper, and am 32 years old. I was hiding in the upstairs bathroom at my parents' house during an early December family gathering when my entire world collapsed. Voices drifted up through the heating vent from the living room below, crystal clear in the winter silence. I recognized my mother's sharp tone, my sister's cruel laugh, my brother's grunt of agreement. They were planning something for Christmas dinner in 3 weeks. Then I caught my own name, followed by the word that made my blood run cold: humiliate. My heart dropped as I pressed myself against the cold tile wall, frozen in place, afraid to breathe. That's when I heard exactly what they had planned for me, and everything I thought I knew about my family shattered in an instant. Before we dive deeper into what happened that day and how I got my revenge, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family or dealt with toxic relatives, you're going to want to hear how this story unfolds. Please hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss stories about standing up for yourself and setting boundaries. Trust me, what happens next is something my family will never forget. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in suburban Connecticut as the middle child in a family of 5. My father, Gerald, is 65 now, a retired insurance executive who always seemed more interested in his golf game than his children. My mother, Constance, is 63, a former real estate agent who spent her entire life climbing social ladders and obsessing over what the neighbors thought. Then there's my older sister, Vivian, who's 35, married to a wealthy lawyer named Preston, with 2 perfectly groomed children and a mansion in the nicest part of town. My younger brother, Mitchell, is 29, given every opportunity our parents could afford, now working at a firm owned by my father's college buddy, engaged to a woman named Bethany, who comes from what mother calls good breeding. And then there was me, Harper, the one who never quite fit the mold, the disappointment, the afterthought. From the time I was young, I knew I was different from Vivian and Mitchell. Where Vivian excelled at everything that mattered to our parents, winning beauty pageants and dating boys from wealthy families, I preferred art class and therapy books. Where Mitchell was celebrated for merely showing up, praised for mediocre grades and handed opportunities he never earned, I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. When I chose to become an art therapist instead of following a corporate path, I might as well have announced I was joining a circus. My mother's disappointment was palpable, her sighs heavy whenever someone asked what I did for a living. I make a decent living, $52,000 a year, enough to support myself and help my clients heal from trauma. But in my family's eyes, if you're not making 6 figures or married to someone who is, you might as well be unemployed. The criticism intensified after my divorce 2 years ago. My ex-husband Clark was emotionally abusive, controlling every aspect of my life, from what I wore to who I spoke to. But when I finally found the courage to leave him, my family acted like I'd committed a crime. They loved Clark, or rather, they loved his family's money and connections. My mother actually told me I was throwing away my best chance at respectability. My father barely acknowledged the divorce, just shook his head like I'd confirmed every disappointment he'd ever had about me. Vivian made passive-aggressive posts on social media about the importance of commitment and working through marriage problems. Mitchell's fiancée Bethany started making jokes about how I'd end up a crazy cat lady. The fact that I chose not to have children, a decision I made consciously and happily, was seen as another failure in their eyes, another way I'd refused to give them what they wanted from me. The past 6 months had been particularly brutal. At Thanksgiving dinner, my mother made pointed comments about my life choices in front of all the guests, asking loudly if I was dating anyone or if I'd given up on finding another husband. Vivian constantly posted perfect family photos on social media. Elaborate photo shoots with matching outfits and professional photographers, carefully curating an image of domestic bliss while pointedly leaving me out of any family pictures. Mitchell's fiancée Bethany had started openly condescending to me, making remarks about my rental apartment compared to the house she and Mitchell were buying. My father barely acknowledged my existence anymore, looking through me at family gatherings as if I were furniture. But I kept trying, kept showing up, kept hoping that somehow, someday, it'd finally be enough for them. I kept telling myself that family was important, that blood mattered, that surely underneath all the criticism was love. I was so desperate for their approval that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. That early December day, it arrived at my parents' house ahead of everyone else, hoping to help my mother with decorations for Christmas planning. I thought maybe if I showed up early, if I was helpful and eager, she might soften toward me. Shed accepted my offer with cool indifference, directing me to hang garland while barely looking at me. When Id excused myself to use the bathroom upstairs, I had no idea I was about to hear the conversation that would change everything. I was washing my hands when I heard my name drift up through the old heating vent, and something in my mother's tone made me freeze. That's when I learned the truth about what my family really thought of me, and what they were planning to do about it. I stood frozen in that upstairs bathroom, my wet hands dripping onto the tile floor, as voices floated up through the heating vent, with perfect, terrible clarity. The old house had excellent acoustics, something I'd never appreciated until that moment when I could hear every word being spoken in the living room directly below me. At first, I thought I must have misheard. Surely my mother hadn't just said my name with that much venom. Surely that wasn't my sister's laugh, high and cruel, echoing through the vent. But as I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath, there was no mistaking what I was hearing. My mother's voice came first, sharp and decisive in a way I'd never heard directed at me to my face. "So, we're all agreed? Christmas dinner is when we do it." The words dripped with malice, a tone so foreign from the cool indifference she usually showed me that I felt my stomach drop. Harper needs to be taught a lesson once and for all. She needs to understand her place in this family, or rather, her lack of one. I heard the clink of ice in a glass, the sound of someone settling into a chair. My sister Vivian spoke next, and her voice was full of barely contained glee. "Oh, Mother, it's perfect. She'll be so humiliated she'll finally get the message. I've been waiting years to put her in her place. She walks around acting like she's so noble with her little therapy job, helping people, making a difference." Vivian's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Meanwhile, she's a divorced failure who can't even afford to buy a house. It's embarrassing to even call her my sister." My brother Mitchell's voice joined in, deeper, matter of fact, and somehow that made it worse. "Bethany and I have been talking about this for months. We don't want her around our wedding next year. She brings down the whole atmosphere, you know? Always trying so hard to fit in, always looking like a kicked puppy. It's pathetic. This Christmas thing will be the perfect way to make her understand she's not really part of this family anymore. She's always been an embarrassment, let's be honest." I felt my knees weaken, but I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. If they knew I was up here listening, if they heard the floorboards creak or the water still dripping in the sink, everything would change. So I stood there, trapped, forced to hear every word of their betrayal. But the worst was yet to come. My father's voice, usually so silent around me, so distant and dismissive, suddenly filled the vent with an authority I'd never heard him use when speaking about me. "I've never understood that girl. She's nothing like Vivian or Mitchell. Your mother's right, it's time she learned her place. I'm tired of walking on eggshells, tired of pretending. Maybe after Christmas dinner, she'll finally stop coming around, stop forcing herself into family events where she clearly doesn't belong." The casual cruelty of it, the way he said that girl instead of my name, made something inside me crack. This was my father, the man who was supposed to protect me, supposed to love me unconditionally, and he was discussing my removal from the family like I was a problematic employee he wanted to fire. They went on to lay out their plan in excruciating detail, and I was forced to listen to every word. Christmas dinner would be their stage, with 15 to 20 people in attendance as it always was, a mix of extended family and close family friends. My mother would make a toast after dessert, something that seemed loving and warm on the surface. Then she would invite everyone to share honest thoughts about each family member, framing it as a tradition of growth and love. But it was a trap, and I was the target. They'd already spoken to several relatives, gotten them on board with the plan. Uncle Raymond would go first, talking about how I'd never lived up to my potential, how I was a disappointment compared to my successful siblings. Cousin Trevor would make jokes about my failed marriage and my rental apartment. Then Vivian would deliver the killing blow, talking about how I'd always been jealous of her, How my divorce was inevitable because I was too difficult and needy. How I made every family gathering about me and my problems. Mitchell would announce that he and Bethany didn't want me at their wedding, that my presence was too uncomfortable for them. And my father, in his role as family patriarch, would suggest that perhaps it was time I took some distance from family gatherings, that maybe I needed to focus on fixing my life before I could be part of theirs again. My mother would frame it all as concern, as tough love, as something being done for my own good. But the goal was crystal clear. They wanted to humiliate me so thoroughly, so publicly, that I would leave and never come back. They wanted to drive me out of the family without having to explicitly tell me I wasn't wanted. They wanted me to do it myself, to disappear quietly, so they could tell themselves and others that it was my choice, my inability to handle honest feedback, my oversensitivity. It'll be the best Christmas gift we give ourselves, getting rid of her, my mother said. And the others laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed up through the vent, sharp and cruel, the sound of people enjoying their own cleverness, their own cruelty. My father added, "I'll make sure I record it on my phone. We might need proof later if she tries to play the victim, tries to tell people we were cruel. We'll have video showing she was just given honest feedback and couldn't handle it." The premeditation of it, the calculated malice, the way they were already planning their defense against any accusation of cruelty, made me realize this wasn't impulsive. This was planned, organized, thought through. They'd been working on this for weeks, maybe months. Every smile they'd given me, every invitation to family events, every moment I thought we were connecting, had been a lie. They'd been counting down to my public destruction, savoring it, planning it like other families plan, surprise parties or special gifts. I stood in that bathroom, tears streaming silently down my face, my whole body shaking, my hand pressed over my mouth to keep from making any sound. I felt like I might vomit, might collapse, might scream. But I couldn't do any of those things because they were right below me, and if they knew it'd heard, everything would change. They'd find a way to spin it, to make me the villain for eavesdropping, for violating their privacy. So I waited, breathing shallowly, tears falling onto the bathroom tile, until finally their conversation moved on to other topics, to Christmas menu planning and gift exchanges for other people. When I was sure they were distracted, I crept out of the bathroom, down the stairs, and grabbed my coat. I called out that I had an emergency at work, that I had to leave immediately. They barely looked up, just waved dismissively, probably pleased I was leaving early. My mother didn't even walk me to the door. I got into my car, drove 2 blocks, and had to pull over because I was crying so hard I couldn't see the road. I don't remember the drive home. I know I pulled over twice more, sobbing so hard my whole body shook, gasping for air like I was drowning. When I finally made it to my apartment, I collapsed on my couch and let the full weight of what I'd heard crash over me. My entire worldview had shattered in the space of 15 minutes. Everything I thought I knew about my family, every memory I had, every interaction shared, suddenly looked different through this new lens. All those times my mother had been cool and distant, I'd told myself she just wasn't demonstrative. All those times Vivian had excluded me from events or photos, I'd told myself she was just busy with her own life. All those times Mitchell had made little cutting remarks, I'd told myself it was just sibling teasing. All those years my father barely noticed me, I'd told myself he was just not good with emotions. But now, I knew the truth. It wasn't that they were bad at showing love. It was that they didn't love me at all. They actively disliked me, actively wanted me gone, and had been pretending otherwise while planning my removal. That first night was the worst. I lay on my couch, replaying every family interaction I could remember, seeing the hidden contempt I'd missed before. The way Vivian's smile never reached her eyes when she looked at me. The way Mitchell would smirk when I talked about my work. The way my mother would sigh heavily whenever I arrived at family gatherings. The way my father would find reasons to leave the room when I tried to talk to him. All of it made sense now. I'd spent 32 years trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it to me. People who saw me as a burden, an embarrassment, a problem to be solved. I cried until I had no tears left. Until my eyes were swollen and my throat was raw. I considered calling my mother, confronting her, demanding an explanation. But what would be the point? Shed already explained herself perfectly in that living room conversation. There was nothing she could say that would undo what it heard. The second day brought a different emotion: anger. It started as a small spark, a flicker of heat in my chest, but it grew steadily as I thought about what they'd planned. They weren't just going to cut me out quietly, privately, with some dignity. They were going to humiliate me publicly, make a spectacle of my removal, ensure that everyone we knew would witness my degradation. They were going to record it, keep evidence of my humiliation, use it against me if I ever tried to tell anyone what they'd done. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. These were people who claimed to love family, who posted endlessly on social media about the importance of family bonds, who presented themselves to the world as pillars of their community. But behind closed doors, they were planning the systematic destruction of someone they were supposed to love, and not just planning it, but looking forward to it, excited about it, treating it like entertainment. Something hardened inside me that second day. I've always been conflict avoidant, always been the peacemaker, always been the one to apologize first, even when I'd done nothing wrong. My therapist friends say I'm a classic people pleaser, someone who learned early that my worth was tied to making others comfortable. But something fundamental shifted in me when I heard that conversation. For the first time in my life, I felt my people-pleasing instinct die. I didn't want to smooth this over. Didn't want to pretend it hadn't happened. Didn't want to make it easier for them. They had declared war on me, and I was tired of being a victim. I was tired of being the family doormat, the one everyone could treat poorly because they knew I'd always come back for more. I was tired of trying to earn love from people who had none to give. Most importantly, I was tired of letting other people define my worth. I started to form a plan, slowly at first, just the seed of an idea. I'm an art therapist, trained in human psychology, skilled at understanding what makes people tick. I know my family better than anyone, know what they value most, what they fear most. Their greatest pride is their reputation, their image in the community, their carefully curated appearance of being a perfect, loving family. Their greatest fear is exposure, is having their private cruelty made public, is losing the respect they've worked so hard to cultivate. They'd planned to humiliate me publicly, to use the witness of others as a weapon against me. What if I turned that weapon back on them? What if I gave them a public revelation they'd never forget, but one that was built entirely on truth, on facts, on evidence they couldn't deny? I wouldn't have to lie or exaggerate. I'd just have to present reality clearly enough that no one could ignore it. I spent the next week in a fever of research and documentation. I went through old emails, text messages, voicemails, any written record of our interactions. I looked at childhood photos with new eyes, seeing the pattern of favoritism I'd tried so hard to ignore. I found my journals from high school and college, filled with my desperate attempts to understand why I was never good enough, why my achievements were minimized while my siblings were celebrated. I reached out to people my mother had pushed out of our lives over the years, people I'd lost touch with, and heard their stories of how they'd been treated, how my mother had systematically alienated anyone who didn't serve her purposes. I looked into my father's business history, his carefully hidden scandals, the ethics violations he'd swept under the rug. I dug into the cracks in Vivian's perfect marriage and Mitchell's fraudulent career. I gathered evidence of everything they'd hidden, everything they'd lied about, everything that contradicted the image they presented to the world. Part of me felt guilty at first, felt like I was crossing some line, violating some unspoken family code. But then I'd remember their voices drifting up through that heating vent, the joy they took in planning my destruction, the casual way they discussed removing me from their lives like I was trash to be discarded. They'd already decided to wage this war. I was just refusing to be defenseless. This wasn't revenge, I told myself. This was self-defense. This was setting a boundary they couldn't cross. This was me saying, clearly and publicly, that I would not be humiliated, would not be discarded, would not go quietly into whatever exile they'd planned for me. I would control my own narrative, present my own truth, and let the chips fall where they may. If that destroyed their reputation, well, They should have thought of that before they planned to destroy mine. By the end of the third week, I had everything I needed. I had documentation, evidence, witness statements, recordings, proof of every claim I planned to make. Id designed it beautifully, using my art therapy skills to create something that was visually compelling, professionally presented, and emotionally devastating. Id thought through every possible response they might have, every way they might try to deflect or deny. Id prepared for every contingency. And most importantly, Id made peace with what I was about to do. I was going to burn down the bridges between us, was going to make it impossible for things to ever go back to the way they were. But those bridges were rotten anyway, held up by my desperate hope and their calculated cruelty. It was time to let them fall and build something better in their place, even if that something better didn't include them. The first week of my preparation phase was dedicated to documenting everything I could remember about my childhood and family dynamics. I pulled out old photo albums my mother had given me years ago, probably hoping I'd display them and make her look like Mother of the Year. Instead, I studied them with the analytical eye I use in my therapy practice, looking for patterns. In every family photo, Vivian was front and center, perfectly posed, my parents' hands on her shoulders. Mitchell was always next to my father, standing proud, included in every important shot. And there I was, consistently placed at the edges of frames, sometimes partially cut off, often looking awkward and uncomfortable, because no one had bothered to help me pose. In my high school graduation photos, my parents looked bored. In Vivian's graduation photos from the same school, they looked radiant with pride. The evidence was right there, had been all along. But I'd trained myself not to see it. I found my journals from childhood and adolescence, painful reading that made me want to hug my younger self, page after page of me trying to understand why nothing I did was good enough, why I couldn't make my parents proud, why I felt like a ghost in my own family. It documented everything back then without realizing it, creating a perfect record of emotional neglect and favoritism. There were entries about Vivian's 16th birthday party, an elaborate event with 100 guests and a live band, compared to my 16th birthday, which was dinner at a chain restaurant with just immediate family. There were entries about Mitchell getting a new car for graduation, while I was told I could use my mother's old sedan when she was done with it. There were entries about family vacations I wasn't invited on because there wasn't enough room even though we had a 5-bedroom house, and they could have easily included me. The documentation was heartbreaking, but it was also powerful evidence of systematic exclusion. I dug deeper into my father's business history, using public records and connections I'd made over the years. Gerald had always presented himself as a pillar of the business community, ethical and above board in all his dealings. But in 2015, there'd been a case involving client fraud that had settled quietly, paying off the affected parties in exchange for their silence. There'd been a bribery allegation from a disgruntled employee that had disappeared after the employee suddenly received a generous severance package. None of it had made the news because my father had money and connections, but the court records were public, the settlement agreements were filed, and with some digging, I could access all of it. This was the man who'd called me a disappointment, who'd suggested I was unworthy of being part of the family. His own ethical violations made my worst mistakes look like nothing. The second week, I reached out to people my mother had systematically alienated over the years. First was my cousin Daphne, my father's niece, who'd been cut off from the family 5 years ago over what seemed like a minor disagreement. I'd always wondered what really happened, because Daphne had been close to our family. Then suddenly she stopped coming to gatherings, and my mother would change the subject whenever her name came up. I called Daphne, nervous about reopening old wounds, but she answered on the second ring, and when I explained who I was, she laughed bitterly. "I wondered when one of you would finally ask," she said. She told me the whole story. How Shed questioned my mother about the way she talked about me behind my back, how Constance had turned on her immediately, spreading rumors that Daphne was mentally unstable and couldn't be trusted. My mother had poisoned the family against her so thoroughly that even Daphne's own father, my uncle, had reduced contact with her. Daphne had emails proving my mother's lies, messages showing the manipulation, and she was more than happy to share them with me. Then I contacted Ruth, an elderly woman who'd been close to my parents for decades but had stopped coming to family events about 3 years ago. I'd always liked Ruth, remembered her kind smile and the way she'd ask me real questions about my life, not the performative questions other family friends asked. When I reached her by phone and explained what I was calling about, there was a long pause. Then she said, "Your mother is one of the cruelest people I've ever known, and I've lived 78 years. Ruth told me how Constance had spread rumors about Ruth's finances after Ruth had refused to invest in one of my mother's friends' business schemes. Suddenly, everyone in their social circle believed Ruth was broke, was mooching off others, couldn't be trusted to pay back small debts. None of it was true. Ruth had a comfortable retirement fund and had never borrowed money from anyone, but the damage was done. She'd been too tired and too old to fight my mother's lies. So she'd simply withdrawn from that social circle entirely. She had documentation of her actual financial situation and copies of the emails where my mother had spread the lies. She sent all of it to me with her blessing and her hope that I'd finally hold Constance accountable. The most surprising ally came from an unexpected place, my ex-husband Clark. I hadn't spoken to him since our divorce was finalized 2 years ago, and I had no desire to reopen that chapter of my life. But I needed one specific piece of information, something only he could confirm. I sent him a carefully worded email, not explaining my full plan, just asking if he'd kept any communications with my parents from during our marriage. To my shock, he responded within hours and asked if we could talk on the phone. When I called, hesitant and guarded, he surprised me by apologizing. He'd remarried, was in therapy, and was trying to make amends for his past behavior. He admitted that he'd been controlling and emotionally abusive during our marriage, and he wanted me to know he took full responsibility for the divorce. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. Clark said that my mother had encouraged his controlling behavior, had told him repeatedly that I needed a firm hand and that I was too independent for my own good. My father had given him advice on how to manage me, suggesting he control my finances and limit my contact with friends who gave me ideas above my station. They'd actively worked to make my marriage more abusive, had reinforced Clark's worst instincts, had treated me like property that needed to be controlled rather than a person who deserved respect. Clark had emails proving all of this, messages from my mother praising him for keeping me in line, advice from my father on how to make me more manageable. He said he'd been too caught up in his own issues to see how wrong it all was at the time. But now, with therapy and distance, he realized my family had been toxic influences on our marriage. He sent me everything, not asking what I planned to do with it, just saying he hoped it helped me get free of them the way his divorce and therapy had helped him get free of his own toxic patterns. By the third week, I had more than enough material. I had documentation of favoritism, evidence of financial and ethical violations, proof of systematic alienation of anyone who questioned my mother's behavior, and testimony from multiple witnesses about my family's cruelty. But I needed to present it in a way that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. This is where my art therapy training became invaluable. I know how to present difficult truths in ways that people can actually hear, how to organize information so it tells a clear story, how to create visual presentations that are both beautiful and devastating. I spent days designing the document, laying it out like a coffee table book, professional and elegant. The cover was simple, the real family history, a documentation in clean, classic font. Inside, I organized everything into clear sections, each one building on the last, creating an undeniable narrative of dysfunction and cruelty. Section 1 documented the pattern of favoritism with side-by-side comparisons of how I was treated versus how my siblings were treated. Birthday parties, graduation gifts, parental attention, financial support, every measure showed clear and consistent preference for Vivian and Mitchell. Section 2 laid out my father's business ethics violations with copies of court documents and settlement agreements. Section 3 exposed the cracks in my siblings' perfect lives. Preston's gambling debts that Vivian didn't know about, Mitchell's job performance reviews showing he was on the verge of being fired despite nepotistic protection. Section 4 gave voice to the people my mother had hurt and alienated, including Daphne's story and Ruth's story with full documentation. Section 5 was the most devastating. A transcript and audio recording of the conversation I'd overheard. Their plan to humiliate me. Their joy in planning my destruction. And Section 6 was my response. A clear statement about boundaries, self-respect, and what happens when you try to abuse someone who's finally learned to fight back. I had each document professionally printed and bound, about 50 pages each, with elegant covers that looked more like high-end presentations than accusations. I made copies for every family member who would be at Christmas dinner, each one with their name carefully calligraphed on the cover. I also created a digital version, stored in multiple cloud locations, ready to be sent to their entire social circle if they tried to retaliate. The night before Christmas Eve, I looked at the stack of documents on my table and felt a wave of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to blow up my family in such a public way? Then I remembered my mother's voice saying, "It'll be the best Christmas gift we give ourselves, getting rid of her." I remembered my father saying he'd record my humiliation to use as evidence against me later. I remembered all of them laughing. The doubt disappeared. They'd declared war on me, and I was just making sure I wasn't defenseless. Christmas Eve morning, my phone rang at 9. I saw my mother's name on the screen and took a deep breath before answering. Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with false warmth that I could now hear clearly for the performance it was. "Darling, good morning. I hope you're having a wonderful Christmas Eve. I just wanted to confirm that you'll be here tomorrow at 2, as we discussed. I'm so excited for our family dinner. I've planned something really special this year." I could hear the anticipation in her voice, the barely contained excitement. She thought she was calling to confirm the arrival of her victim, making sure I'd be there for my own public execution. I kept my voice steady, neutral, giving nothing away. "Yes, Mother, I'll be there at 2. I'm looking forward to it." That part was true, just not in the way she thought. "I'm actually bringing some gifts for everyone, something I've been working on for a while." There was a pause on her end, a slight hesitation. "Oh? What kind of gifts, dear?" I could hear the suspicion creeping into her voice, the slight concern that maybe I'd figured something out. I smiled to myself, looking at the stack of bound documents on my table. "It's a surprise, Mother. Something personal for each family member. I think everyone will find them very meaningful." Another pause. "How thoughtful of you, Harper." "Well, I suppose I'll look forward to it." She tried to sound pleased, but I could hear the uncertainty. "Good. Let her wonder. Let her worry." "I'll see you tomorrow, Mother. Merry Christmas." I hung up before she could probe further, my hand shaking slightly. This was real. This was happening. In less than 24 hours, everything would change forever. I spent Christmas Eve doing things that felt like self-care, but were really more like preparing for battle. I got my hair done at a salon, not trying to impress anyone but wanting to look polished and put together, wanting to walk in there looking like someone who had her life under control. I bought a new dress, a deep burgundy that was elegant without being flashy, modest but well cut. The kind of dress that says I respect myself without saying anything at all. I wasn't dressing to compete with Vivian's designer labels or to prove anything to anyone. I was dressing like someone who knew her worth, who didn't need external validation, who was about to do something terrifying and wanted armor made of confidence. I wrapped each of the documents carefully in beautiful gold paper, the kind of wrapping you'd use for expensive gifts. I wrote each family member's name on their package in careful calligraphy, making them look thoughtful and precious, like something people would be excited to open. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, looking at the packages stacked on my dining table, and let myself feel the full weight of what I was about to do. This wasn't just about defending myself or setting boundaries. This was about permanently severing ties with the family I'd been born into, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. After tomorrow, there would be no going back, no reconciliation, no future family gatherings or holiday traditions. I was choosing to become an orphan by choice, cutting myself off from my entire family tree. Part of me grieved for that loss, for the family I'd always hoped we could be, for the love I'd always hoped I might eventually earn. But mostly, I felt relief. I was done hoping, done trying, done accepting crumbs of affection from people who had none to give. I was choosing myself, maybe for the first time in my life, and that choice felt like freedom. I thought about calling the whole thing off, about just not showing up tomorrow, disappearing from their lives quietly the way they wanted me to. It would be easier in some ways, less confrontational, less dramatic. But then I realized that's exactly what they were counting on, that I'd make it easy for them, that I'd slink away in shame and let them tell whatever story they wanted about why I was gone. They'd probably say I couldn't handle their honest feedback, that I was too sensitive, that it'd always been difficult, and finally they were free of me. They'd rewrite history, make themselves the victims of my abandonment, never taking responsibility for their cruelty. No. If I was going to leave, I was going to make sure the truth went with me. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly why I was gone and exactly what they'd done. This wasn't revenge. This was testimony. This was evidence. This was truth. Christmas Eve night, I slept better than I had in weeks. I didn't toss and turn, didn't wake up in the middle of the night panicking about what I was about to do. Instead, I slept deeply and dreamlessly, the sleep of someone who's finally made a decision and found peace in it. When I woke Christmas morning, the sun was streaming through my apartment windows, and I felt calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. Today was the day I stopped being a victim. Today was the day I stopped seeking approval from people who would never give it. Today was the day I took my life back and walked away from people who'd never valued me. I got dressed carefully, did my makeup precisely, gathered my wrapped packages, and headed to my car. As I drove toward my parents' house for what I knew would be the last time, I didn't feel scared or anxious. I felt powerful, in control, ready. They thought they were getting a victim. They were getting a woman who'd finally learned to fight back. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 2 in the afternoon, the winter sun already starting to fade behind bare trees. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the house where I'd grown up, the perfectly decorated exterior with its tasteful wreaths and white lights, the image of suburban holiday perfection. Inside that pretty facade was a family that had spent weeks planning my public humiliation, savoring it, perfecting it. I picked up the elegant shopping bag containing the wrapped documents, took one deep breath, and walked to the front door. I didn't have to ring the bell because my mother opened it before I could reach for the knob, her smile bright and false. "Darling, Merry Christmas! Come in, everyone's already here." She air-kissed my cheeks, her perfume overwhelming, her touch cold and brief. I returned the smile, matching her false warmth with my own. "Merry Christmas, Mother." The living room was full of people, maybe 18 in total, more than I'd expected. My father Gerald sat in his usual leather armchair, barely glancing at me as I entered, his attention on his phone. Vivian was on the sofa with her husband Preston and their 2 children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, who had always genuinely liked even if their mother was cruel. Vivian's eyes lit up when she saw me, not with warmth but with anticipation, like a cat watching a mouse walk into a trap. She was wearing an expensive designer dress, her hair and makeup perfect, ready for the photos she'd post later about their perfect Christmas. Mitchell was near the fireplace with his fiancée Bethany, and Bethany's smirk when she saw my dress told me she was already judging it as inadequate. Uncle Raymond and Aunt Lucille were there, my mother's brother and his wife, both looking pleased to be included in whatever was about to happen. Cousin Trevor, Raymond's son who'd bullied me throughout childhood, was lounging in a chair with a beer, his expression already mocking. Several family friends were scattered around, the Hendersons and the Caldwells, couples I'd known my whole life who'd always been kind to my face, but who apparently had agreed to participate in my humiliation. I greeted everyone warmly, playing my role perfectly, the dutiful daughter and sister happy to be included in the family celebration. I complimented Vivian's children on their outfits, asked Mitchell about his wedding plans with apparent enthusiasm, thanked my mother again for hosting such a beautiful dinner. They all watched me with varying degrees of anticipation, some more obvious than others. I noticed people exchanging glances, little smirks passing between my mother and Vivian, knowing looks between my father and Uncle Raymond. They thought I was clueless, thought I had no idea what was coming, and they were enjoying my ignorance almost as much as they'd enjoy the actual event. I played into it perfectly, setting my shopping bag down beside an empty chair, acting like this was just another Christmas, just another family gathering where it'd be tolerated at best and mocked at worst. During the pre-dinner cocktail hour, the performances became even more obvious. Uncle Raymond made a point of coming over to me, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder with false affection. "Harper, sweetheart, how's life treating you?" "Still in that apartment over in Hartford." The emphasis on that apartment was subtle but clear, the implication being that renting at my age was something shameful. I smiled serenely, refusing to take the bait. "Yes, Uncle Raymond, still there. It suits me perfectly. Great location and the right size for my needs." I saw the flicker of disappointment in his eyes that I hadn't reacted with shame. Cousin Trevor wandered over with his beer, grinning in a way that made my skin crawl. "Hey Harper, dating anyone special? Or have you given up on that after the Clark situation?" His tone suggested my divorce was a personal failure, something laughable. I kept my smile steady. "I'm focusing on myself right now, Trevor, making sure I'm healthy and whole before bringing someone else into my life. Self-care, you know." The concept seemed foreign to him, but he shrugged and moved away. At 4, my mother announced that dinner was ready, her voice carrying that particular tone of command she used when orchestrating social events. We all moved into the dining room, and I saw immediately how strategically Shed arranged the seating. The table was beautiful, I had to give her that, with its white linens and crystal glasses and elaborate centerpiece of winter greenery and gold accents. But the seating placement told the real story. My mother sat at the head of the table, my father at the foot, positions of power and control. Vivian and her family were close to mother on one side, Mitchell and Bethany close to father on the other. I was seated at the far end, isolated, separated from the main family groupings, positioned perfectly to be the focus of attention when the time came. I recognized it for what it was, a stage setting, with me as the unwitting performer about to be put on display. I took my seat gracefully, placing my shopping bag beside my chair, and Vivian's eyes immediately locked onto it. "What's in the bag, Harper?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. The whole table seemed to pause, attention shifting to me and my mysterious packages. I smiled warmly, meeting her eyes without flinching. "Christmas gifts for everyone. I've been working on them for a while. Something personal for each family member. I thought I'd hand them out after dinner, as a way to contribute to the celebration." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly, just a fraction, a momentary crack in her perfect hostess facade. She recovered quickly, but I'd seen it, that flicker of uncertainty, of concern that maybe something wasn't going according to her plan. "How thoughtful of you, dear," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Well, I'll look forward to that." My father grunted something that might have been agreement, his attention already back on his phone. The conversation moved on, but I noticed people kept glancing at the bag, curiosity and anticipation mixing with whatever role they'd been assigned in the upcoming drama. Dinner was traditional, roasted turkey with all the classic sides, the kind of meal my mother had been perfecting for decades. The food was excellent, I had to admit, even if every bite tasted like ash in my mouth. Conversation flowed around me. Discussions of holiday plans and work updates and gossip about people I didn't know. I was mostly excluded from these conversations. People talking over me or around me, but rarely to me. A pattern I'd experienced my whole life but could now see clearly for what it was. I ate calmly, sipped my wine, and observed the dynamics I'd missed before. The way Mitchell deferred to our father on every topic, seeking approval like a dog seeking treats. The way Vivian performed her perfect life, making sure everyone knew about her children's achievements and her husband's success. The way my mother orchestrated it all, directing conversation, ensuring everyone's attention went where she wanted it, building toward the moment she'd been planning for weeks. I saw my mother check her watch twice during the meal, saw Vivian getting increasingly animated as dessert was served, saw Mitchell exchanging grins with our father. They were getting close to their moment, building up to the toast and the planned destruction that would follow. I felt strangely calm, almost detached, watching them like I was observing a play rather than sitting at the table. I knew what was coming, had known for weeks. and Eid had time to prepare not just my response but my emotional state. They thought they were getting someone fragile, someone who'd crumble under public criticism, someone who'd cry and leave and never come back. They had no idea what was actually about to happen, no idea that Id flipped their script entirely, no idea that they were the ones walking into a trap. As dessert plates were cleared and coffee was poured, my mother stood, tapping her wineglass with a fork, and the room fell silent. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for, the moment it'd been preparing for. Let the show begin. My mother stood at the head of the table, every inch the gracious hostess, her smile warm and her eyes cold as winter. The room fell silent immediately, everyone's attention drawn to her as Shed trained them to do over years of hosting these gatherings. She tapped her wineglass one more time for effect, the crystal ring filling the air like a bell marking the beginning of an execution. Everyone, may I have your attention please? As if we weren't all already staring at her, waiting for whatever performance Shed prepared. I want to thank you all for being here on this special Christmas day. Family is so important, the bonds that hold us together through everything life throws at us. The irony of those words coming from her mouth was almost funny. I kept my face neutral, my posture relaxed, giving them nothing to read. Today, I want to try something a little different, Constance continued, her voice taking on that particular tone of false sincerity she used when manipulating people, a tradition of honesty and love. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give each other is the truth, even when that truth is difficult to hear. It's how we grow, how we become better versions of ourselves. I recognized the setup immediately, the careful framing that would make their cruelty seem like kindness, their planned humiliation seem like loving intervention. Several people around the table nodded, buying into the premise, not seeing the trap being set. I think we should go around the table and each share some honest thoughts about each other, help each other grow and improve. What do you think? She looked around the table, and the conspirators nodded eagerly, while others looked uncertain but unwilling to object. Let's start with Harper, my mother said, turning her cold smile directly on me, and I felt the entire room's attention shift like a spotlight had just been aimed at my face. Since she's family and we love her, let's help her understand some truths she needs to hear. The phrasing was perfect, poisonous, setting up their attacks as loving concern rather than the calculated cruelty it actually was. My heart was pounding, but I kept my breathing steady, my hands relaxed in my lap, my expression pleasantly neutral. Let them think I didn't know what was coming. Let them think they had the element of surprise. That would make what happened next even better. Uncle Raymond went first, standing up as if he were giving a toast at a wedding, his face arranged in an expression of paternal concern that was completely false. Well, Constance, since you're asking for honesty, I think Harper needs to hear this. He looked at me directly, and I met his gaze without flinching. Harper, honey, I think you need to understand that you've never quite lived up to your potential. Look at your sister. She has a beautiful family, a successful husband, a life anyone would be proud of. Look at your brother, building a career, getting married, making something of himself. But you? You're divorced, renting an apartment at 32, working a job that barely pays the bills. Maybe it's time to reevaluate your choices. Take a hard look at why your life hasn't turned out the way it should have. He said it with this fake concerned tone, but his eyes were gleeful, enjoying his role in my public shaming. Cousin Trevor went next, not even bothering to stand, just leaning back in his chair with his beer and his smirk. Yeah, and Harper, no offense, but you're kind of embarrassing to the family, you know? My friends ask about you sometimes and I don't even know what to say. Like your sister's got it together, your brother's doing well, but you're just kind of there, not really successful at anything. You're 32, you should have your life figured out by now. It's kind of sad, honestly. He laughed, and several people around the table joined in. Small, uncomfortable chuckles that were meant to diffuse the cruelty of what had just said but only amplified it. I sat perfectly still, my face calm, and I saw the first flicker of confusion in my mother's eyes. I should have been reacting by now, showing hurt or anger or shame. My lack of reaction was throwing off her script. Then Vivian stood up, and this was the moment Shed been waiting for, the starring role in my destruction that Shed probably rehearsed in her head 100 times. She looked radiant, confident, every inch the successful golden child, and her voice carried across the room with perfect clarity. Since we're being honest, I've wanted to say this for years. Harper, you've always been jealous of me, and everyone in this family knows it. You can't stand that I have everything you'll never have. A real marriage that lasts, beautiful children, a husband who respects me, a life people actually admire. Your divorce was inevitable. Clark told us you were impossible to live with, controlling and needy, and constantly making everything about you. Maybe if you weren't so difficult, so demanding, so fundamentally mediocre at everything you try, someone would actually want to be with you. She paused, letting her words sink in, looking around the table to make sure everyone was appreciating her performance. You make every family gathering about you and your problems. It's exhausting being around you. Mitchell stood next, and his contribution was shorter but just as cruel in its casual dismissiveness. Look, sis, I'm just going to be blunt because apparently someone needs to be. Bethany and I don't want you at our wedding next year. You bring down the energy of every event you're at. You make people uncomfortable. And honestly, you just not be there. This whole family walks on eggshells around you, trying not to hurt your feelings, trying to include you in things, and it's exhausting. Maybe it's time you got the message and gave everyone some space. Bethany nodded vigorously next to him, adding in her nasal voice, "It's true, Harper. You're kind of a downer. We want our wedding to be a happy day, not have to manage your emotions all day." But the worst was yet to come. And I'd known it would be. My father stood slowly, commanding attention through sheer patriarchal authority, and when he spoke, his voice was flat and matter-of-fact, like he was giving a business report rather than destroying his daughter. "Harper, I've never known what to do with you. You're not like your siblings, you never have been. Where they showed ambition and drive, you showed stubbornness and poor judgment. Where they made choices that elevated the family's standing, you made choices that embarrassed us. Your sister married well. Your brother is building a respectable career, but you? You divorced a good man from a good family. You work a job that anyone could do. You live in a rental apartment like you're still in college. I'm disappointed, frankly. I've been disappointed in you for a very long time. Maybe your mother's right. Maybe some distance would be good for everyone. Give you time to figure out your life without dragging the rest of us down." Finally, my mother delivered her planned finale, standing again and speaking with that perfect blend of false sympathy and steel. "So, Harper, darling, we say all this with love. We truly do. But I think you can see that perhaps after today, you'll understand where things stand. We've discussed this as a family, and we think it's best if you take some time away from family gatherings. Give everyone space. Let things settle. You're welcome to visit occasionally, of course, but the holidays, the birthdays, the celebrations, we think it's better if you skip those going forward. It's really for your own good, Harper. You'll be happier not constantly comparing yourself to your siblings, and we'll all be more relaxed not having to worry about upsetting you." She smiled, that sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're doing this because we love you enough to be honest." The room fell silent after her words. That heavy, awkward silence of people who'd just witnessed something uncomfortable, but were complicit in it. Some people looked delighted, the main conspirators grinning at each other like they'd just pulled off a successful prank. Others looked deeply uncomfortable, particularly the Hendersons, who were shifting in their seats and not making eye contact with anyone. But no one spoke up to defend me. No one said that maybe this wasn't appropriate. No one suggested that perhaps publicly humiliating someone at Christmas dinner wasn't the loving intervention they were pretending it was. They were all waiting for me to react, to cry or yell or leave, waiting for the final act of this drama where I'd flee the room in tears and they'd all congratulate themselves on tough love well delivered. Instead, I took a slow sip of my wine, set the glass down carefully, dabbed my mouth with my napkin, and stood up with a smile. The confusion on their faces was absolutely beautiful. I stood at my place at the end of the table, and I let the silence stretch for a moment, watching the confusion ripple across their faces. They'd been expecting tears, expecting me to crumble, expecting me to run from the room in humiliation. Instead, I was smiling, calm, completely composed. "Thank you all for that," I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying across the room with perfect calm. "That was quite illuminating, truly. The honesty is appreciated." My mother's brow furrowed slightly, not understanding why I wasn't reacting the way she'd planned. "I have to admit something, though. I knew this was coming. Every word of it." Sharp intake of breath from Vivian, my father's eyes narrowing. "I overheard you planning this 3 weeks ago, on December 2nd, when I was upstairs in the bathroom at this very house." The color drained from my mother's face as I continued. "The heating vent carried your voices perfectly. I heard everything. Your plan to humiliate me publicly, your joy in planning it, your excitement about finally driving me away from the family. Mother, I particularly enjoyed your comment about how this would be the best Christmas gift you'd give yourselves, getting rid of me. That was really touching." Uncle Raymond shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly very interested in his coffee cup. "I heard Father say he'd record my humiliation to use as evidence if I ever tried to play the victim. That showed some real forethought, Dad, planning your defense before you'd even committed the crime." "Wait, you were spying on us?" Mitchell sputtered, trying to turn this around, trying to make me the villain. I laughed, actually laughed, and the sound seemed to startle them. "I was using the bathroom in my parents' house, Mitchell. You were the ones having a conversation about destroying me in a room with a heating vent that carries sound perfectly. If anything, you were spying on yourselves." I reached down for my shopping bag, pulling it up onto the table. "Now, about those Christmas gifts I mentioned. I've been working on these for 3 weeks, ever since I heard your plan. One for each family member present today." I started pulling out the elegantly wrapped packages, each one with a name calligraphed on the gold paper. "Please, everyone, open them together. I insist." Their hands trembled as they opened the packages, some faster than others, until they were all holding the bound documents I'd created. The covers were beautiful, professional. The title, "The Real Family History," a documentation embossed in gold. I let them flip through a few pages, saw the moment comprehension dawned on their faces, saw the panic start to set in. "Let me guide you through what you're holding," I said, my voice taking on the calm professional tone I used when helping therapy clients process difficult truths. Section 1 documents the pattern of favoritism and emotional neglect I experienced growing up. Photos, journal entries, school records, everything showing the systematic preference for Vivian and Mitchell. It's all there, undeniable, documented over decades. "This is ridiculous," my mother started to say, standing up. But I raised my hand and she actually stopped, shocked by the authority in my gesture. "I'm not finished, Mother. Sit down." And she did, actually sat back down, because something in my voice told her I was in control now, not her. Section 2 addresses Father's business ethics violations from 2015. "The bribery case you settled quietly, Dad. The client fraud you paid people to keep quiet about. All public records, all perfectly legal for me to obtain and share." My father's face went from pale to red, rage building, but he said nothing because what could he say? It was all true, all documented, all right there in black and white. Section 3 is my favorite part regarding my siblings. I continued, and Vivian's eyes went wide with panic. "Vivian, your perfect marriage. The gambling debts Preston has been hiding from you, $137,000 across 3 different casinos. All documented with credit reports and records from the casinos themselves. I'm honestly surprised you didn't know, but I suppose Preston's been very careful." Preston had gone completely white, his hands shaking as he held the document. Vivian turned to him, her mouth open in shock, but no words came out. "And Mitchell, your career built entirely on nepotism. The performance reviews documenting your incompetence, the complaints from colleagues about your work, the fact that you're currently on a performance improvement plan and likely to be fired within 3 months. The only reason you've kept the job this long is Father's connections, and even those are wearing thin. You bitch," Mitchell hissed, standing up, his face red with rage, but I just looked at him calmly. "That's not a denial, Mitchell. Nothing I said was untrue, was it?" He sat back down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Section 4 covers the people Mother has systematically alienated over the years. Daphne's story, how you destroyed her relationships with her own father over a minor disagreement. Ruth's story, how you spread lies about her finances when she wouldn't invest in your friend's scheme. All of them, every person you've hurt and pushed away when they didn't serve your purposes, all documented with their testimony and the evidence they kept. Then I pulled out my phone, connecting it to the small Bluetooth speaker I'd brought in my purse. Section 5 is the part I'm most proud of, I said, and I could hear the satisfaction in my own voice. After I overheard your conversation on December 2nd, I went back a few days later with a recording device. Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recordings, which means since I was part of the conversation you were having about me, I was perfectly within my rights to record it. So let me share with everyone exactly what you all said when you thought I couldn't hear you. I pressed play, and their voices filled the dining room, crystal clear, undeniable. My mother, it'll be the best Christmas gift we give ourselves, getting rid of her. My father, I'll make sure I record it, might need proof if she tries to play victim later. Vivian's cruel laugh. Mitchell's eager agreement. All of it preserved forever, impossible to deny. The room erupted into chaos. My mother stood up, shaking, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. You had no right to record us. That's illegal. I shook my head calmly. Actually, as I just explained, it's perfectly legal. One-party consent. Mother, look it up. Vivian was screaming at Preston about the gambling debts, demanding explanations he couldn't give. Mitchell and my father were in a heated argument, Mitchell blaming father for not protecting him better at work. Aunt Lucille was reading through the document with growing horror, looking at her husband Raymond with disgust. The Hendersons and Caldwells looked deeply uncomfortable, clearly wishing they'd never agreed to attend this dinner. Trevor was silent for once, staring at the document like he couldn't quite process what was happening. I raised my voice over the chaos, cutting through the noise with practiced ease. Everyone, please, let me finish. The room quieted somewhat, though the tension was electric. Section 6 is my statement. I want to be very clear about something. I didn't do this for revenge. I didn't do this because I wanted to hurt any of you. I did this for truth and self-preservation. You planned to humiliate me publicly in order to drive me away from the family. You spent weeks perfecting your plan, coordinating your attacks, making sure everyone knew their role. You were going to record my humiliation to use as evidence against me later. All I'm doing is defending myself with facts, with documentation, with truth you can't deny. I looked at each of them in turn, making eye contact, making sure they understood. Mother, you said after today I'd understand that I should stay away. You were right, but not in the way you intended. I do understand now. I understand that I've spent 32 years trying to earn love from people who are incapable of giving it. I understand that you're cruel, manipulative, and toxic. I understand that I deserve better than this. So here's what happens now. I picked up my coat and purse, gathering my things while they all watched in stunned silence. I'm leaving, and I won't be coming back. Not because you don't want me, but because I don't want you. This is me choosing myself, choosing my mental health, choosing to stop accepting crumbs of affection from people who have none to give. You ungrateful little, my mother started, but I cut her off with a raised hand. Save it, mother. Save all of it. There's nothing you can say that will undo what I heard you planning. Nothing you can say that will make those recordings disappear. I pulled out my phone, showing them the screen. Oh, and one more thing. I have a digital version of all of this, stored in multiple cloud locations, ready to send to every person you know. Your friends, your colleagues, your social circle, everyone. The blood drained from my mother's face again. I don't want to do that. I don't want to humiliate you publicly the way you planned to humiliate me. But I will if any of you try to retaliate against me, spread lies about me, or harass me in any way. I will let the truth speak for itself, and we all know how much you value your reputation. I walked toward the door, and not one person tried to stop me. They were all too shocked, too caught up in processing what had just happened. At the doorway, I turned back one last time. Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope you all have the family gathering you deserve. Then I walked out, closing the door on the sounds of their chaos, their recriminations, their world falling apart. I walked to my car in the fading Christmas light, got in, started the engine, and drove away. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with me, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I'd done it. I'd stood up for myself, set boundaries they couldn't cross, and walked away with my dignity intact. For the first time in my life, I'd chosen myself over their approval, and that felt like the greatest gift I could have given myself. I drove home through empty Christmas streets, my whole body shaking as the adrenaline drained away and the reality of what I'd just done hit me in waves. When I got to my apartment, I barely made it to the couch before I collapsed, and then the tears came, but they were different from the tears I'd cried 3 weeks ago. These weren't tears of grief or betrayal. These were tears of release, of freedom, of finally letting go of hope for something that had never existed in the first place. I cried for the little girl who'd tried so hard to be good enough, for the teenager who'd thought she just needed to try harder, for the adult who'd kept accepting abuse because she thought that's what family meant. I cried for all the years I'd wasted seeking approval from people who were never going to give it. And then I was done crying, and what I felt was peace. My phone exploded with notifications, 17 missed calls and dozens of texts before I finally turned it off completely. In the morning, when I turned it back on briefly to start blocking numbers, I saw the messages they'd sent. My mother's were full of rage and denial, demanding I apologize immediately, threatening legal action she had no grounds for, insisting I'd destroyed Christmas and the family with my lies and manipulation. Vivian's messages alternated between threats and insults, blaming me for exposing Preston's gambling, saying I'd destroyed her marriage out of jealousy, calling me names I won't repeat. Mitchell sent one angry text calling me a vindictive witch, and then went silent. My father sent a single message. You've disappointed me for the last time. You are no longer my daughter. I read each message once, felt nothing but relief, and blocked every number. They were out of my life now, permanently, and I'd never felt so free. The first week after Christmas, I took the time off work I'd already planned and focused on healing. I slept deeply for the first time in months, waking up without the knot of anxiety in my stomach that had become so familiar. I ate well, took long walks, started journaling again, but this time about the future, instead of trying to understand the past. Some messages got through before I'd finished blocking everyone, and they showed me exactly who my family really was. My mother tried every manipulation tactic she knew, from rage to guilt to fake concern, trying to find some lever that would make me respond. Vivian threatened to turn our mutual friends against me, not realizing I'd already prepared for that and had no intention of fighting for relationships with people who'd side with her anyway. But there was one unexpected message that got through before I blocked the number. From Mitchell, 3 days after Christmas, just 2 words. You're right. I didn't respond, but I hoped it meant he was finally getting help. The support that came from unexpected places was overwhelming. Cousin Daphne called me, having heard from Aunt Lucille what happened, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. Harper, you're my hero. I heard about what you did, how you stood up to them with evidence and truth, and I'm so proud of you. We met for coffee the next week, and began rebuilding a relationship my mother had destroyed years ago. Ruth, the elderly family friend, sent me a beautiful bouquet with a card that read, "Proud of you for speaking truth. That took courage most people never find. Love, Ruth." My best friend Sloane, who'd supported me through the planning process, threw me what she called a freedom party, just a small gathering of real friends who valued me, and it was the best celebration I'd had in years. These were people who chose me, who wanted me around, who saw value in who I was, rather than disappointment in who I wasn't. My art therapy practice actually grew in the months after Christmas. Something had shifted in me. A new authenticity and strength that my clients sensed immediately. I was more present, more effective, better able to help people navigate family trauma because I'd finally navigated my own. I stopped people-pleasing, stopped apologizing for taking up space, stopped accepting less than I deserved. Word spread, referrals increased, and by March I'd been invited to speak at a conference about setting boundaries with toxic family members. I told my story anonymously, but the lessons resonated with hundreds of people who'd experienced similar dynamics. My career thrived in ways it never had when I was still seeking my family's approval, maybe because I was finally seeking my own approval instead. Through the grapevine, I heard about the fallout in my family, though I felt no responsibility for any of it. Vivian and Preston were in intensive marriage counseling, and Preston had entered treatment for gambling addiction. Vivian's perfect image was shattered in their social circle. People were talking, and she couldn't control the narrative the way my mother usually did. Mitchell actually did get fired in early February, and from what I heard through Daphne, Head had something of a breakdown, and was finally in therapy dealing with the pressure of living under our father's expectations. My parents' reputation was damaged in their community, several friends and colleagues having distanced themselves after hearing whispers of what happened at Christmas dinner. Uncle Raymond had apologized to Daphne and was trying to rebuild that relationship, though she was taking it slowly. The family had basically imploded, each member dealing with truths they could no longer ignore, but I felt no guilt about that. I hadn't destroyed the family, it simply exposed what it already was. I started my own therapy, not as the therapist but as the patient, working through decades of childhood trauma and recognizing the patterns of codependency and people-pleasing ID developed as survival mechanisms. I learned about family scapegoating, about narcissistic family systems, about how children learn to blame themselves for their parents' inability to love them properly. I grieved the family I'd never had, the parents who'd never protected me, the siblings who'd seen me as competition rather than connection. But I also celebrated the family I was building, the chosen family of friends and colleagues, and people who valued me for who I actually was. I took up pottery, joined a book club, made new friends who didn't know anything about my history and just liked spending time with me. I was rebuilding my identity completely separate from my family's narrative about me. 3 months after that Christmas dinner, I met someone new. His name was Owen, and he was kind and patient and came from a healthy family that actually seemed to like each other, which was such a foreign concept to me I didn't know how to process it at first. He was patient with my healing, understanding when I needed space, never pushing me faster than I was ready to go. When I finally met his family for Sunday dinner, I was terrified, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the criticism and manipulation to start. Instead, his mother hugged me warmly and asked genuine questions about my work. His father told terrible dad jokes and included me in the laughter. His siblings treated me like I'd always been part of their group. I went home that night and cried because I finally understood what family was supposed to feel like, and it was nothing like what I'd grown up with. By the following Christmas, a full year after the dinner that changed everything, I hosted my own celebration in my apartment. It was small and intimate, just the people I'd chosen. Daphne, who'd become like the sister I'd always wanted, Sloane and her partner, Ruth, who at 79 was still sharp and funny and wise, Owen and 2 other close friends I'd made through book club. We cooked together, laughed until we couldn't breathe, exchanged thoughtful gifts that showed we actually knew each other, and I felt a contentment I'd never experienced at my parents' elaborate Christmas dinners. This was what family was supposed to be, I realized. Not people bound together by blood who barely tolerated each other, but people who chose to be together, who valued each other, who brought joy instead of judgment. I'd lost the family I was born into, but I'd found something better. Reflecting on that Christmas dinner a year ago, I still didn't regret what I'd done. Some people might say I went too far, that I should have just quietly cut contact instead of exposing everything publicly. But I understand now that silence would have been worse, would have left them free to tell whatever story they wanted about my absence, would have left me carrying shame that wasn't mine to carry. By speaking truth clearly, and backing it up with evidence, I'd taken control of my own narrative. I'd protected myself from their ability to rewrite history. I'd set boundaries so clear they couldn't possibly misunderstand them. Was it painful? Absolutely. Did it cause damage? Yes, to relationships that were already damaged beyond repair. But it was necessary for my survival, and I'd do it again. The lessons I learned that Christmas have shaped everything that came after. I learned that family isn't always who you're born to. Sometimes it's who you choose, and choosing wisely is one of the most important things you can do for your mental health. I learned that keeping peace at the cost of your self-respect is too high a price to pay, that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away, even when it's hard. I learned that speaking truth isn't cruel even when it's uncomfortable, that honesty delivered with evidence is just information, and what people do with that information is their choice. I learned that I'm worthy of love and respect, just not from people who are incapable of giving those things, and that's okay. I learned that you don't owe anyone access to you, not even family, especially not family who treats you poorly. That Christmas, I lost a family, but I found myself, and that was the greatest gift of all. I found the courage to stand up for myself, the strength to walk away from abuse, the wisdom to know that I deserved better. I found freedom from the desperate need for approval from people who would never give it. I found peace in knowing my worth isn't determined by whether my birth family values me. I found joy in building a life on my own terms, surrounded by people who actually want me there. The gift they'll never forget, my absence from their lives, and the truth I left in my place, was actually a gift I gave myself: permission to be free, permission to be happy, permission to live without them. If you're reading this and recognizing your own family in my story, please know that you deserve better too. You don't owe anyone access to your life, your energy, your peace of mind, not even family, especially not family who uses that relationship to hurt you. The gift they'll never forget might just be your absence. And that's not just okay. It's self-preservation. It's self-love. It's freedom. Sometimes walking away from toxic people, even when they're family, is the bravest and healthiest thing you can do. You are worthy of love, respect, kindness. And if your family can't give you those things, you have permission to find them elsewhere. Choose yourself. Choose your peace. Choose your freedom. That's the gift you deserve. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with toxic family members? Have you experienced being the scapegoat in your family? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below, and let's support each other through these difficult experiences. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories about standing up for yourself and choosing your own happiness. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community where we support each other in choosing ourselves. I wish you all the courage to set the boundaries you need, the strength to walk away from what hurts you, and the joy of building the life and family you deserve. Happy holidays, everyone, and may they be filled with people who truly value you.